Okay, so I'm Rollo Crittenden, and today we're doing a virtual tour of Crittenden Estate, my family's vineyard and winery based at the foot of Red Hill, about 5 kilometres inland from the township of Dramana. From our perspective, my family's been growing grapes and making wine down here since 1982. My parents bought the vineyard, or bought the greenfields land back in 82 and set about establishing the vineyard, which was actually one of the first in the region at the time. It was farmed conventionally for a long time, probably about 25 years. And it was only probably, maybe 15 years ago that we started to realise that we had a few issues that we needed to address in the vineyard. We'd been using synthetic herbicides, all sorts of chemicals in the vineyard. It was the way at the time, it was just, if you had a problem, there was a chemical to fix it. It really became apparent through both the quality of the wines that we were producing, or the lack thereof, about 15 years ago. Some of the wines were fantastic, but we did have a bit of an issue where our wines were losing balance at the time of harvest. And if you trace that back, of course, to the vineyard, we realised that our soils were dying out. If you took a shovel and put it into our soil this time of year, it would be, the soils would be basically quite chalky, so there would be no nutrient in there. And that was, I guess, the root, excuse the pun, of our issues. And so we didn't know what to do to rectify this, but we knew that we had to do something. We knew that we had to bring nutrient back into our soils that would flow through to the vines and then increase the quality of our grapes, which of course would flow through to our wines. So we started to feel our way with it. The first thing was to try and eliminate synthetic chemicals and really sort of avoid using excessive herbicides. Obviously glyphosates were a big no-no. And then once we sort of reached that sort of ground zero, we then started to reinvest in our soils with doing things like composting, green mulching, which we'll take a look at today. This is down at our compost making site. So we've made compost here on the property for about 7 years, maybe 8 years. And each year now we produce about 400 cubic metres of compost. And the great thing is that a lot of what we're using to make the compost is byproduct from other parts of the winemaking process and also byproducts from other industries as well. So if we look over the back there, we've got some wood chips. So that's basically from local arborists that we've got a relationship with, and so they're sometimes happy to dump that. We've got here the horse manure component. So this comes from local racehorse stables. And the other great thing about the manure that comes out of the horse stables is that it has a really high component of sawdust too. And then over here, which we'll go and have a quick look at, we've got the byproduct of the winemaking process. Okay, so over here we've got the grape mark from the 2020 vintage. So each year we take the grape skins, stalks and seeds from our winery, and we also take them from other local wineries too. And it's a great component to make compost out of. It's really high in nitrogen, high in carbon. And so as you can see, this has already started to break down. So in here, if you look closely, we've got, lots of grape skins. If you look even closer, you'll see some seeds in there. And of course, we've got the stalks themselves. So up until about 7 years ago, this all went to landfill, which was a great waste. We would just bring in a heap of the large, 3-metre skips and would load the skins straight into there. And then we would, when they were full, we'd call the dump trucks and they'd come and it would go out to landfill. So, just such a waste of a beautiful resource that we're now putting back into the soil, which is fantastic. So what will happen in the next week is we'll get an excavator in and we'll mix all of this, all of the grape skins in with all of the manure and all of the lignified wood and all of this straw here too. And that forms the basis of a really good compost. So what you've got is 1/3 green material. So the grape skins make what's known as the green material, 1/3 manure and 1/3 lignified wood, which is the mulch and the straw. And mould it out into a really big row. And every 2 or 3 weeks, we'll turn that over and aerate it and make sure that the moisture component's right. And gradually that'll compost and break down. We check the temperature, make sure that the temperature component's okay as well. And that'll break down. And after about 6 months of regular turning, it will form this beautiful, rich compost that we'll go and have a look at now. This is the pile of compost that we produced last year, and this is now finished, and you'll still see some of those grape skins and seeds in there, but it is fully broken down and there'll be no heat coming out of this because the breakdown, the compost process is finished where it generates that heat. So here we are at one of our 2 beehives that we have on the property. Grapevines actually don't need bees to pollinate, they self-pollinate. So the intention of having bees on the property is not so much from a viticultural perspective, but we do have a lot of fruit trees on the property too. So my dad, his background was horticulture. He loves growing fruit trees. We have a lot of citrus trees, a lot of apples, pears and some figs and all sorts of things. And so the bees have really helped with the pollination of all these fruit trees. And the other great benefit is that we do harvest the honey and we sell the honey at the cellar door. We've got our own honey label that we've established in partnership with the apiarist who looks after the bees for us. And yeah, so it's fantastic to have the benefits of the bees, but also the ability to sell the honey that was made or produced on site. Okay, so this is one of our storage tanks for our grey water. So about 15 years ago, we connected up to a grey water offshoot. It's the one that runs from Craigie Road out to Gunnamatta, and it's situated. The pipe runs. It's located about 700 metres, or maybe nearly a kilometre, to our west. And essentially, what we've done is we've tapped into that, and we bring the grey water across, and we put it into large storage tanks, and then we use that to irrigate our vineyard and our lawns on the property, which is fantastic. So we're not drawing on the soil water at all, and we're also it's again another byproduct. It's a wastage product that is going out to the ocean. So it's nice to be able to tap into that. Yeah, so it's just a fantastic resource. The reason we can't put it into our lake on the property is that it's Class C water. It's usually Class A, but it is sometimes shanded in with Class C. So we do need to keep it separate before we put it into the soils in the vineyard. But the other thing that's probably worth noting is that with all of the work that we've been doing in the vineyard with green mulching and composting, we tend not to irrigate very much. There's not a huge need to get water into the soil, but on those really hot days when we do need to keep things ticking over, it's a great resource to have. So if you're tapping into mains water, obviously that's far more expensive. So you're looking at a huge cost per litre for use of any sort of treated or mains water. And the other thing is that if you don't have a good water resource when establishing a vineyard, it can take a lot longer to get the vines up to a sort of a mature level where you're cropping. But in this instance, as I was saying, it's not a huge need for us, but it is nice to have it when we do actually need to tap into it. Up until about 2 years ago, any of the wastewater that came from our winery, production on site, would actually go out to a tree lot on the property. So the problem with winery waste, or winery water waste, is that it is quite acidic. So it's quite low in pH and quite high in acid. And it does have a fairly high BOD level as well. So we're quite fortunate on this property, given our proximity to a local school and I guess the township of Dromana, that the property is connected to the sewer. So what we did 2 years ago is we installed this water treatment plant, which actually is fantastic because through a series of catchment areas and pH monitoring, we were able to adjust that acid level by dosing it with some other sort of alkaline products. And then this actually gets dumped into the sewer reservoir that we have on site, and the wastewater goes off site and into the sewer. So ultimately, if you think about it in round terms, any of our wastewater from the winery here is actually going out to the mains water, and then we're taking it back from recycled water and using it for irrigation on the property in a roundabout way. So it is that really nice cycle of making sure that you're taking care of your own waste products. We're standing now in front of the office building here, and we've got our cellar door behind. And so about 2.5 years ago, we applied and were granted, luckily from the Mornington Peninsula Shire, for the environmental upgrade scheme. And that let us put in these solar panels. So basically, rather than paying the power company, we actually pay off these panels with the Shire. And this generates 32 kilowatts of power here, and we've got an equal set over on the winery building as well, which generates the same amount of power. So in winter, we're probably a little bit behind, and summer we're a bit ahead. So we actually push power back to the grid, which is fantastic. But it really means that we've diminished our power usage off the grid dramatically, and we are relying on the solar panels here, which is fantastic, both from an environmental perspective and ultimately from a financial perspective, as the power prices seem to be going up and up. As well as composting, what we do in the vineyard here, which I think is equally as important, is we do an interrow crop. What we tend to do is we alternate the rows that we do the interrow crop each year. So this year we're doing it on this row, and then next year it'll be across in the adjoining row. The reason being that when we prune, we have to pull the prunings into a row and then mulch them back into the vineyard. So in order to get the best benefit out of the interrow crop that we're planting, we like it to grow right up beyond the pruning season. So what we do, we plant a mixture of seeds into the soil. We plant snow peas, We also plant faba beans or broad beans this year, and we plant an oat. So some of them are sort of high nitrogen, like the faba beans or the broad beans, and the peas are really high nitrogen, and they benefit the soil but when we mix it back through. And then we also like to have something with a lot of bulk there as well, and a different range of root types as well that helps for the nutrients to penetrate into the soil. So rather than actually mowing once the Interrow crop reaches a maturity, what we tend to do is we roll them. So once we have a critical mass, we actually send the roller through the vineyard, and that breaks the cell walls of all of the grasses and peas, the legumes, and it actually presses them back down into the soil. So over the summer months, that gradually breaks down into the soil, so gradually adding the nutrients that we want to see in the soil, but it also prevents evaporation of soil moisture, which is a great benefit. So we'll take a little dig. This has just been sown about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, so we'll have a little dig and see what we can dig up. All right, so the soil's nice and friable. I think having a good amount of oxygen in the soil is really important as well. We are at the start of winter now, so it does sort of show that there's not too much moisture. It's draining really well. And here you can see the starting of our Interrow crop. So we've got some peas here and some faba beans or some broad beans that have already started to germinate. So it's a good sign, you know, that they've kicked off. One of the key things that we've learned over the past few years, I guess more recent years, is trying to not disrupt the soil as much as possible. So historically what we'd usually do prior to sowing the seeds is we'd actually give it a good disc, give it a power harrow, and really make sure that we've got a nice fine soil tilth to plant into. And the wisdom being that this was great for germination. But what we've learned is that every time we're disrupting and breaking up the soil, we're breaking up that beautiful microbial layer that grows in the soil, which is benefiting the vines. So now we're really trying for a more direct drill approach. So what we use is a disc seeder to plant the seeds, which goes straight into the soil. We're also finding that as the soil quality increases and it's more friable, it's easier to actually germinate the seeds just by direct drilling. So if we'd done this originally, maybe 10 years ago, straight into the soil, we'd probably have a really low germination rate because the soil wasn't in a position to strike the seeds. But now we're in a position with the beautiful fine soil that we have, that when we direct drill, we do actually have really good seeding rates. And so again, hopefully this year we'll have some good germination. It's safe to say that one of the greatest issues that we face as viticulturalists is undervine weed problems. So of course we've got the interrow covered, and that's great, but it's the undervine itself where we have a few issues still with weeds, and it is safe to say that we still don't have the perfect solution. We don't want to have bare earth. We know that it's really important to ensure that we've got some sort of cover under the vines. The ideal scenario would be to keep it mown, to keep them down from the cordon and down from the fruit zone. It's very labour intensive. There's no machine that we've found that works perfectly to mow the undervine. We have worked with teams of people with whippersnippers, but of course that gets quite costly. So you can see that we're still resorting to some degree of herbicide undervine. We try and avoid synthetics. We certainly don't use glyphosates. On the very rare occasion, we might use a Basta in certain areas when things get too dramatic. But lately we've been working with a product called Slasher. Slasher is an organic certified product. And Slasher basically is a form of acid that breaks the cell walls in the plants themselves and knocks them down. The problem that we have is it's about 4 times more expensive than Basta, and it's also not nearly as effective. If it's a really hot day, you can get a pretty good kill, but it does only burn the tips of the weeds themselves. It's non-systemic, as is Basta, so it does it doesn't actually get down and kill the root base. So it won't be long before you get that growth coming back through. So weeds are the eternal issue, and we're constantly looking for a solution, and we're getting there, but there is no sort of silver bullet so far. So we're here in the barrel store. Of course, the great thing about, I guess, a family-owned and operated business is that the grapes are grown here on the property. Once harvested, the fermentation process happens here, and then here we are in the barrel store. So these barrels are full of our 2020 vintage wines, just gently resting over the winter period, and then come February next year, we'll start to take them out of the barrels, get them cleaned up and ready for bottling and ready for enjoyment. Thanks very much for taking the time today to watch the video, and I hope you actually got a little bit of benefit out of what we're doing. I think it's great that we're able to share this information, and a lot of what we've learned has been by looking what other people do too. So thanks again, and we look forward to a day when we can have you out to the vineyard and see what we're doing in the flesh.